Hey, this is Tom Webster, and this is Sounds Profitable for Wednesday, July 26th. Only be kind. Today I'm going to reflect on the life of someone who was very important to me and also very important to the audio business in general, and I think a valuable lesson that we can learn from how he thought about life. Before we get to that, now live, the Sounds Profitable job board. If you've got an open position in the business of podcasting, submit it to us for placement on soundsprofitable.com and inclusion in our relevant news coverage. Check out the job board now at soundsprofitable.com. This is not the podcast that I thought I would do this week. I just spent 10 days in Sicily on a family vacation, and if you've been following the news at all, Italy was caldo last week with temperatures soaring over 100 every single day. But still, we were game. We were well dressed, we were well hydrated, and the last part of our trip in Taormina was truly spectacular until the very last day. Friday morning, I woke up in my hotel room, checked my phone, and saw from a former coworker that Frank Cody had passed away. I was in tears immediately. I knew he'd been ill for a while, but it was still a kind of a gut punch to me because I had hoped to see him one more time, and I never will. In the early 90s, fresh out of grad school, I moved to Princeton, New Jersey to be with my girlfriend at the time who was getting her PhD there. And after a year or so of working as a tech writer, I decided I needed a change of pace, and so I applied for a local company called Broadcast Architecture. People called it BA after that for years. Now, I had done some radio both in high school and even as an undergrad in Boston, and the ad that I responded to was looking for someone interested in both radio and research, so I figured I've got a shot. Luckily, I was at least close enough to what they were looking for, and the two partners at BA, Frank Cody and Bryan Stone, hired me as a project manager. Now, here's a news flash. After a brief career in literature and teaching rhetoric and composition at Penn State, I turned out to not be a very good project manager. And maybe I'm a little better now, and maybe not. I think a lot of people would have watched my struggles in that job and just determined I wasn't a good fit. But that wasn't how Frank thought about things. And this was one of many, many things that I learned about managing people, but just leadership in general, from Frank and Bryan over the 7 years that I worked at BA. Frank had a very simple management philosophy. Instead of berating you for your weaknesses, he summed up his approach like this: figure out what people are good at and have them do those things. Frank was under no illusion that I was going to have a career as a project manager, and instead, he threw me into the research side of things pretty quickly, and it wasn't long before I was doing focus groups, music testing, and survey research for radio stations all over the world. 2 years into my career, I was already presenting projects to clients, and by the end of my third year, I was often traveling on projects just by myself, which helped BA expand its capacity. Now, I can't imagine the run that I had at Broadcast Architecture happening anywhere else for two reasons. Number one, Frank just ignored my age when it came to gauging my skills. And number two, both Frank and Bryan were incredible at not just sharing credit for successful projects, but redirecting all of the credit to the people working for them. Frank knew something that some people never know, and I might never have known it either if it weren't for him. The more you build other people up, the stronger that you and your company become. Some people need the credit and they need the accolades for their entire career. But by the time I met Frank, he had already achieved more than almost anyone in the history of the radio business. And if you want to see a little bit of that, you can visit frankcody.com, which was a site that was set up to celebrate and commemorate his legacy. Frank gave, and he never took. He built careers for so many people, including my own. I was a VP before I was even 30 in the largest pure-play radio company in the U.S. at the time. That was AM/FM. It's hard for me to imagine that happening anywhere else, and I would not be doing what I am doing today. I would not be talking to you. I would not still be in this business if it weren't for Frank. I learned a lot about the science of audience development and research from both Frank and Bryan. But even more importantly, I learned about the art of interpreting this data from Frank. There's no school, there's no university that teaches how to think about this craft, the craft of attracting an audience, in the way that Frank taught me. He taught me how to dig deeper than face value and understand that what people say in a survey and how people act are often in conflict. He taught me to ask better questions, and he taught me how to recognize the limits of the research that we were doing. And most importantly, how to step back and use data to create an entertainment, something that an audience isn't just tolerant or accepting of, but passionate about. And all of this was because Frank himself was a passionate man and an artist, and he was the kindest man I've ever met. More than once after a really tough project, he would simply spring for a first-class upgrade for the flight home because we'd earned it. I went to Tokyo with him for a couple of weeks for a very big project there with one of the most listened to radio stations in the world at the time. It was a station called J-Wave that had a weekly audience of more than 7 million people. And after a few days in what to me was another planet, Tokyo was like Mars to me, I was starting to enter an introvert coma. I was really getting mentally exhausted. Frank sensed it immediately. He canceled our dinner plans. We ordered room service and a nice bottle of Margaux that we finished in his room, watching Japanese game shows on TV. Because he just knew. He always knew. Frank was passionate about music, and one of his many legacies to the entertainment industry is certainly as the father of the smooth jazz format, and I did a lot of work on that format with him. But Frank loved all music, and the walls of his office were adorned with photos, funny, candid photos, of him posing with Paul McCartney and Joni Mitchell and Tina Turner and so many more. And I have some amazing memories of driving around LA with him at night in a convertible, cranking the latest Bryan Ferry record or John Martin. He taught me all of that too. He shared my passion for magic, and really one of the greatest memories I have with Frank was getting to take him to the Magic Castle in Hollywood and having the legendary sleight of hand master John Carney do a card trick in the hall just for the two of us. We were giddy schoolboys, wide-eyed in amazement and joy. Of course, if you knew Frank, you also knew that he was wildly funny, never in a way that monopolized a conversation and never at the expense of anyone else. I was once having dinner with Frank and the programming team at KTWV The Wave, which is a legendary station in LA that he helped start. And someone mentioned hiring for a position there that would start at minimum wage. I looked at Frank and asked, "Wait, there's a minimum wage?" Frank didn't miss a beat. "Oh, Tom, there's actually two wages, minimum wage and wage. You make wage. Don't worry about it." I still laugh about this. And I laugh at the funny jingles he would make up, which is an affliction that I share, and his cartoon voices, and so many things. Every good thing I've learned about how to work with and, more importantly, treat people in business, I learned from Frank and Bryan. Indeed, how they treated each other as business partners is the very model of how I want my partnership with Bryan Barletta to unfold here at Sounds Profitable. Today, the news is littered with awful bosses doing awful things, sputtering tone-deaf justifications for their terrible actions. You see horror stories on X all the time. Heck, some of those are about Twitter. But Frank taught me to always take care of the people that take care of you, from waitstaff to direct reports. He was unfailingly kind, even in the worst situations. I wasn't a perfect employee, and I still had a lot to learn when I finally left BA. But one thing that was indelibly stamped into my brain, thanks to Frank, was that kindness was not a weakness. Kindness is true strength. Now, the past 6 months or so have seen a lot of upheaval in almost every business, and podcasting has not been immune to that. Some of the stories are positive, some of them are horrible, but regardless, a lot of talented people have found themselves without a job, and the ways in which these displacements have been handled have not always been good. And I mourn the loss of Frank Cody, but I want to leave you with something that is beyond the usual platitudes, right? Not to treat every day as precious or reach out to people you love because one day they may be gone. I'll leave that to the motivational speakers. What I think Frank stood for was this: we're all fighting a great battle. Be kind. Even when things aren't going well, or you have to lay people off, or you yourself need to find another job, only be kind. Ultimately, podcasting is a very, very small business, and you're going to be seeing each other for years to come, sometimes on the way up and sometimes on the way down. Only be kind. When I decided to leave BA to join a startup in London back in 1999, Frank and Bryan threw me a party. They gave me some beautiful, expensive luggage, knowing I'd be traveling back and forth to Heathrow all the time. Imagine that. One of the very last things Frank said to me in our numerous Facebook Messenger chats over the years was this: "I truly believe we're here to help." Frank Cody believed that to his core. I love that man, and I'm going to miss him every day. Thanks again for listening to the Sounds Profitable podcast this week. This episode was built using Spooler and hosted on Art19. I'm Tom Webster, and I'll see you next time.